Rastafari. What's up, people? We are live in full effect. Let me know how you guys are feeling. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Let's have a look who we got in the live chat before we get into some boxing talk. We got Samil in the place, Debiaka, MT, Jack Trussler, Arco, Ben Odom, Charlene, what's up, Charlene? Warts, Disgruntled Buddha, okay. G the PT, big up. Mark Hatch, Kieran Malcolm, John, Gary, Rickards, Dolomite, Waved, Sean, Askip, Mac B, Sully, Mr. Jack, James Clifford. That's right, G the PT. Bless up the chat every time. Kieran Malcolm, Agni, yes, please smash the like button. Thank you in advance. It really helps by way of the algorithm, boosting these lives up to the top of searches and recommended videos. So much appreciated if you guys can all smash that like button. Jim Fink, big up. We got Kai in the place. We got Brad H. We got Pickles. We got World of Bob Arlette from Harlem. Shout out to the Harlem crew, Harlem World. Big up Matt with a super chat. He says, the more I go into this fight week, the more I think Itauma will get chin checked like his brother and be uber exposed. Dillian Whyte looks best shape. Shout out to Black Dynamite. Shout out to Fernie G. I cannot dismiss the possibility of something like that happening because Itauma is just a prospect. And we've seen so many times over the years, highly touted prospects go in there against the grizzled veteran, which is what Dillian Whyte is, and come unstuck. I mean, an example of it would be when David Haye fought Carl Thompson. You guys remember that fight? David Haye had all the hype around him. He'd fought in the Playboy Mansion and this, that, and the other. He was obviously a highly decorated amateur. He was supposed to go in there and destroy Carl Thompson. But instead, he punched himself out, trying to KO Carl Thompson in a couple of rounds. And obviously Carl Thompson survived and came back. You know, the old man David Haye a little bit, came back and stopped David Haye. What was that, in 4 or 5 rounds? So it's definitely not beyond the realms of possibility that Dillian Whyte wins the fight. Darius says, Hatman, you see Andre Ward calling out AJ on an Insta video. No, I have not seen that. What's all that about? World of Bob says, everyone desperate for Moses to be chinny. Calm down, people. He'll be absolutely fine. Well, as much as Dillian Whyte appears to be in shape, I'm still sticking with my prediction. I think that Itauma is going to end this fight inside 7 rounds. Will he be tested? Will he be chin checked? Itauma, in my estimation, is way better than his brother, Carol. He's just a completely different animal to his brother. Big up Adrian Remedy. Long time, my guy. What's good? So, yeah, like I say, I'm not going to shift from my prediction. I think Itauma's going to get it done inside 7 rounds. And I'm going to go against, I've mentioned this before, the consensus view that the longer the fight goes, the better it is for Dillian Whyte. I think it's the opposite. I think Dillian Whyte will be most dangerous in the early rounds when he's sharp and when he still has his boxing construct, his shape, as it's referred to in the UK. When he's got his shape, when he's got his best version of balance, and his guard is the tightest, and he's at his sharpest, and he's at his most coordinated. Bear in mind, Dillian Whyte is not a very coordinated fighter, but he's most coordinated in the early rounds. He doesn't have great footwork, but his footwork is best in the early rounds. Now, obviously, all fighters, particularly heavyweights, start to get a little ragged as a fight wears on. But Dillian Whyte is more ragged than most heavyweights to begin with. And because of his age, I'm expecting him to lose his shape and get ragged more rapidly than Itauma does. And when that happens, that's when I think the opportunities for Itauma to land a big shot will present themselves. I wouldn't be surprised if in the early rounds Itauma's a bit cautious, because Dillian Whyte, as Mark Tibbs said, and I've mentioned this before as well, Mark Tibbs, obviously the former trainer of Dillian Whyte, he said on the most recent TalkSport podcast with Simon Jordan that it's going to be interesting to see Itauma in there against somebody with the will, with the type of character of Dillian Whyte, because he's a very, very bullish, aggressive individual. He's defiant. He's stubborn. He's got a totally different type of energy to anyone Itauma's been in with before. So how will Itauma react to that? I think Itauma will maybe be a little bit cautious in the first couple rounds when Dillian Whyte is really firing on all cylinders. I think he'll try to pick his moments, stay out of trouble in the early rounds, maybe even give away a couple of the early rounds. But at some point in the first 7, I'm expecting Itauma to land some big shots and for the fight to be over quite dramatically. It could end in the first, it could end in the 5th, it could end in the 7th. I just think sometime within the first 7 rounds, Dillian Whyte is going to get sloppy, and he's going to get tagged, and he's going to get taken out. If you look at Dillian Whyte's history, against Anthony Joshua, he started brightly. Then he faded. His shape, his stance and everything, his guard, started to get ragged, sloppy. And that's when he got caught in the 7th round against AJ and taken out. Similar situation when he fought Joseph Parker. He was bossing it in the early rounds, but in the latter rounds, Joseph Parker held his shape together better than Dillian Whyte did, and that's when Dillian Whyte suffered a knockdown. Similar thing when he fought Mariusz Wach. In the later rounds against Mariusz Wach, he got himself hurt in that fight. Against Povetkin, it didn't make it to the later rounds in the first fight, but he was making mistakes by that 5th round that he weren't making in the first 4 rounds. So yeah, Dillian Whyte is a sloppy fighter to begin with, but he gets sloppy or more sloppy the longer a fight goes on for. And I think he'll get sloppy at a faster rate, more quickly than Itauma, who's younger, more energetic, and just better coordinated. So I completely understand why some people are skeptical about Itauma in this fight, given the experience gap and all that. But I still see Itauma winning, bro. I think Dillian's going to give it a good go for a couple rounds, but eventually he's going to get clipped. Mighty Meatball says, I've got a feeling Whyte might get caught in round 1. It could happen. Adrian says, I'm good, bro. Always here, but lurking like the invisible man. Can't usually catch the lives. Usually busy. Hope you're good, bro. Big up Mr. Luca for the super chat. He says, we need a round. Okay, an RO16 knockout tourney after Usyk retires. Yeah, that would be good, because that would help to introduce some of the lesser known fighters to the public by putting them in a tournament, publicizing the tournament and stuff like that. So yeah, I'd like to see something like that as well. Mac B says, Hatman Itauma looked frustrated and a little confused against that fat Ukrainian. I'm not sure if Itauma is experienced enough for Whyte at this stage. Well, we will see. I think he is experienced enough. And against the Ukrainian, that Ukrainian's never been stopped. And that Ukrainian actually stopped Matty Harris a couple fights later. And Moses Itauma had a broken hand in that fight. After that fight, he stopped using Everlast Elite gloves. And I think he using our Rivals, or Everlast power locks, but he stopped using Everlast deletes anyway. He broke his hand in the fight, which may have been what the frustration was about, but he beat that guy comfortably who, as I say, went on to stop Matty Harris, who was unbeaten himself. Wave says, never underestimate a yardie from South London. Dillian is going to do the unthinkable and knock Moses out. All right, we'll see. We shall see. Debyaka says, the fat Ukrainian goes the distance with everyone. He's the new Kamil Sokolovsky. Well, Kamil Sokolovsky's been stopped. The fat Ukrainian has never been stopped. He's a very, very tough guy. And like Sokolovsky, he comes to try and win. Shout out to Fight Sport Talk. He actually comes to try and win every time he's in there, the fat Ukrainian. Is it Debchenko? I think it's Devchenko, his name. So let's get into some boxing talk now. We've just been talking boxing, but you know, I've got several topics that I want to talk about here. But before we do, a quick plug. It is Itauma Dillian Whyte Fight Week, so a quick plug about one of my recent film studies. Make sure you check out my Moses Itauma Dillian Whyte film study on Patreon. It's 1 hour of me going through actual footage from both of their fights and pointing out various technical flaws and proficiencies in both men ahead of their matchup next weekend. Will this be liftoff for Moses Itauma, or will the young contender be exposed as another pretender by the old warhorse Dillian Whyte? This film study may persuade you one way or the other. Also, check out this other recent film study I've done, Alexander Usyk, Signs of Decline, where I go through footage of some of his fights, including his most recent win over Daniel Dubois, and point out what I believe to be indications of Father Time catching up with him. As counterintuitive as that might sound to some, given the fact he stopped Dubois quicker in the rematch than he did in the first fight, but there are reasons for that, which I go into. So make sure you check these videos out. You can access them along with previous film studies I've done and hundreds of hours of other exclusive boxing content on my Patreon page via the boxing tier, the Boxing Brotherhood. There's no contract, no commitment. You can cancel at any time. It's cheaper than a cup of coffee. You know the routine by now. All the links are in the description box below. I'll see you over there. All right, that's the plug done. So, on to the first bit of boxing news here. The other day, we get a report that Jarrell Miller versus Michael Hunter is on. This fight is or was set to headline a September the 11th card during Canelo Crawford Fight Week. This is or was supposed to be on the Thursday before Canelo Crawford. And as you can see from this article, the screenshot is from Ring Magazine. Let me just get the whole thing on screen here. There we go. So it says Jarrell Miller, Michael Hunter to headline September 11th card during Canelo Crawford Fight Week. It won't be Jared Anderson as first planned, but Jarrell Miller will still get an All-American heavyweight showdown against age mate Michael Hunter next month. The contest is the first of many to be announced over the coming weeks, set to headline a September 11th event in Las Vegas. Okay, repeating itself from the headline. But this is the bit that we want to focus on. Miller, who was originally slated to face WBA interim champion Fabio Wardley in Ipswich, England on June 7th, is going to face Michael Hunter. Miller withdrew from the Wardley fight, of course, claiming a shoulder injury. He appeared to be on a collision course with big baby Jared Anderson, as Riyadh season head Turki Al-Sheikh outlined during a discussion posted online last month. But now we get this. Don King issues cease and desist to TKO and Seller over Jarrell Miller versus Michael Hunter announcement. It says here, King's biggest issue is that he won a purse bid for the rights to a fight between Hunter and pretend WBA title holder Kubrat Pulev. I like that. Which he would assumedly put on somewhere in Florida in one of the rare cases in modern times that King actually promotes a boxing event. And here's a quote from Don King. He said, "They continue to disobey the WBA and its clear directive on Pulev-Hunter championship fight, excuse me. Hunter is under contract to Don King Productions and he'll be fighting for a world championship." Okay, so they've managed to get a quote from Don King there. I assume it's Don King and not his son. So what I want to say about this, well, first of all, Jarrell Miller didn't really go in on Jared Anderson for pulling out of the fight. Perhaps because he recently pulled out of a fight himself with Fabio Wardley. So it'd be very, very rich of him to basically, be such a hypocrite so close to pulling out of the fight himself and then going in on Anderson for pulling out of their fight. Instead, he said that Anderson may have trouble with his promoter Top Rank, and that's the reason that the fight's not going ahead. Well, here we've got Michael Hunter having trouble with his promoter, Don King, sending TKO and Seller a cease and desist. Now, Michael Hunter, I have to say, is one of the dumbest boxers I've ever seen in my life as far as business. In the ring, he's got good IQ. But outside the ring, as far as dealing with the boxing business, this guy's a dunce. He has made bad decision after bad decision after bad decision after bad decision, to the extent where if you didn't know better, you'd think he was deliberately trying to sabotage his career. Self-sabotage. Do you know what I mean? Because his decisions have been so bad. It's all gone downhill ever since he turned down and, truth be told, ducked the Philip Hrgovic fight. He thought he could go over to Triller and make a load of money fighting nondescript opposition. But that Triller thing didn't last very long. And he looked terrible in a rematch that he had with Jerry Forrest, a fight which most people think he deserved to lose. He somehow got away with, I think it was a draw. And since then he's been fighting literally in obscurity. His career has become more and more obscure. So he finally gets an opportunity this late on in his career, at the age of 37. He's wasted his best years just making terrible business decisions. This is a guy who gave Alexander Usyk one of his toughest fights. Went the distance, He had a lot of talent. He had a lot of promise. But it seems as though ever since he split up with his former trainer-manager Hasim Rahman, he's been a rudderless ship. He's had no direction. Hasim Rahman, as trainer and manager, yeah, he would have been taking 2 cuts. And maybe that's why Michael Hunter left him, because he thought, I don't need to be paying one person for 2 jobs, But Hasim Rahman has got bags of experience, and Michael Hunter clearly needs that kind of guidance. I'm sure he would have been better off financially, despite having to pay Hasim Rahman a decent chunk of his purses. I reckon he would have been better off with Rahman in his corner paying him that money, because he would have been making bigger purses than he has been making. Substantially bigger, in my estimation. So, yeah, very, very disappointing career Michael Hunter has had. And then it's culminated in him signing with Don King. I mean, who the hell signs with Don King in this day and age? It's shocking that a fighter with the ability that Michael Hunter has would sign with Don King. Don King, at this stage of the game, is only an option for fighters who have little to no ability. The Chris Lovejoys of the world. That's who's supposed to go to Don King. Not somebody who's potentially world class. So, Michael Hunter has been offered this fight against Jarrell Miller, relatively short notice. And once again, his ridiculous decision making has come back to bite him in the butt, because Don King's not having it. Now, obviously, Turki Al-Sheikh has got very, very deep pockets. If he wanted to, perhaps he could buy Michael Hunter out of his contract in order to proceed with the Jarrell Miller fight, or compensate Don King otherwise, just pay him like a fee for having Michael Hunter's services. Because obviously if Hunter loses, then the Kubrat Pulev fight may not go ahead, and Don King did win the purse bid for that. So it's all a bit of a mess. Let's see what happens. If the fight were to take place between Michael Hunter and Jarrell Miller, if Hunter was actually in some serious shape, if we could see something like the Hunter of old, I'd pick him to win. Because Hunter is not just a good boxer, he can also fight. He's tough. I don't think Hunter's ever taken a count. He was hurt in the final round against Usyk. But other than that, he's been very, very solid. He took Povetkin's shots. He took Martin Bakoli's shots. He was swinging it out on the inside with an actually physically fit version of Martin Bakoli, if you can believe that. Oh yeah, such a Bakoli once existed. He had some muscle definition in that fight. That was at a York Hall. So Hunter's tough. He's gritty. He's quick. He's got good ring IQ, good boxing skills. He's not a massive puncher, but he hits hard enough. He stopped Martin Bakoli. So the Hunter of old, I reckon, could beat Miller. I think he's got enough savvy about him and enough all-round ability to actually get the job done. But this version of Michael Hunter, even though Miller's the same age, I just don't have that kind of confidence in him anymore. He's wasted his best years. So I probably lean towards Miller, especially since Hunter will be taking this fight on short notice, about a month's notice. So that's my take on this fight. What say you in the live chat? Big up G-Man in the live chat. Somebody says Don King must be 100 by now. He's not far off, I tell you that. He is not far off. All right, need to refresh my tab here. Firefox always doing me dirty. All right, there we go. Don King is in his 90s, I believe, now. G-Man says, I think Hunter got a count against Usyk. Did he? Okay, he got a standing count. Well, yeah, he never went down. So he got a standing count, but he's never actually touched the canvas. As far as I'm aware. Man's never touched the canvas. Samil says, I remember the scorecards for Usyk Hunter. They were like 9-3, very wide for my liking. I thought Usyk won 7-5. Yeah. 7-5, at least 8-4. Hunter definitely won several of those early rounds in the first half of the fight. Kyle says he lost recently. Who, Hunter? But I don't think that's on his official boxing record because he was part of some weird tag team boxing event thing where he jumps in and boxes one round and then he tags someone else and they jump in and box around and so I don't think that's actually on his official record. They show it on BoxRec but not on his official record. Yeah, the IBA, that's not his official record, that's what I'm saying. So if you go on his BoxRec page, they've got like several tabs. And one of them is his professional record, and the other ones are these weird leagues and tournaments he's been fighting in. And they don't count on your official boxing record. As you can see from the graphic on screen, right? That is Michael Hunter's official boxing record, 24-1. The one defeat to Alexander Usyk, he's got 2 draws. The TLC Pro and the IBA and BoxAm, those don't count on his professional record because they're I don't even know how to describe them. How to describe the format and what they are. The losses from those don't count on his official record, nor do the wins. Because if you were to count the losses on those, you'd have to add extra wins as well to his ledger, which we don't. So, yeah. And the loss was, I think, in one of these weird formats where he boxes 1 round and they decided that he lost 1 round or something, you know, so I don't really look much into that. All I can tell you is, that Michael Hunter has thrown away his best years. And a guy throwing away his best years like that, can I really pick him to beat Jarrell Miller? Fight Sport Talk says Hunter at his peak reminded me of a young Michael Spinks. That's a pretty good comparison. Yeah, that's a pretty good comparison. I can see the similarity. I think Hunter's a little sharper. Then Spinks was a little more awkward, but Hunter is a bit awkward too, especially after the first few rounds. He gets a bit ragged and awkward and stuff like that. But I can see the comparison. Agni says Partridge beat Hunter in the amateurs. Hunter disputes that, by the way. He says that he hurt Partridge, battered him, and they gave Partridge a gift decision. And he's been saying that openly. Make of it what you will. There's no footage of the fight as far as I'm aware. Little Jacob says, I can't see how Hunter will be able to offset Miller's marauding style. Not right now, but Prime Hunter, I can see it. Because his feet are so much faster than Miller. And Hunter can fight on the inside. Hunter is one of these like hardened American gym fighters. He's one of the few people who I think could actually swap punches with Miller on the inside and not get overwhelmed. Because Bacoli basically fought exactly like Jarrell Miller would fight, except at a faster pace when he fought Michael Hunter. And Hunter was able to fight Bacoli off. That was the best version of Bacoli, really, looking back at things. Bacoli was in real shape. I think he was 250 pounds for the Michael Hunter fight, Bacoli, believe it or not. Bacoli was on Hunter like white on rice from the opening bell. He was all over him like a rash. And Hunter was throwing all sorts of combinations, fighting on the inside, going to the body, up and down with a jab. It was a really good performance. And so I'm basing my view that a Prime Hunter could beat Jarrell Miller largely on what he did in the Bacoli fight, because stylistically very similar, but Bacoli was moving faster than Jarrell Miller moves. So I reckon personally that Hunter could beat, the Prime Hunter could beat Jarrell Miller, because he's got enough all-round skills, he's got enough toughness, he's got enough ring IQ, you know, he can fight inside, fight outside, mix it up. But this current version, I don't think so. But maybe the fight doesn't go ahead because of Michael Hunter's ridiculous business decisions. Michael Hunter has been completely lost without Hasim Ratman. Big up Jake. Says, yes, Hatman been on holiday, so tune back in. All right, let's move on from this one then. If it takes place, cool. If it doesn't take place, Jarrell Miller will be looking for a different opponent. So, on to one of the fights this weekend. Filip Hrgovic versus David Adeleye. Now, Filip Hrgovic 18-1. David Adeleye 14-1. But these guys, of course, have fought at completely different levels, amateur and pro. Filip Hrgovic was a highly decorated amateur. As a professional, he's been in there against much better opposition than Adeleye has been in there against. The likes of Zheli Zhang, the likes of Daniel Dubois, the likes of Joe Joyce. David Adelaye's best opponent was Fabio Wardley, and he got stopped in that fight. What was it, in the 7th? Other than that, he's fought people like Jamie Shakiva and Solomon Dakers. So totally different level opposition, but that doesn't necessarily mean that David Adeleye can't win. Adeleye is a very impressive athlete. If he can learn to utilize that athleticism effectively, I still think that he might have a chance to become a world-class heavyweight. But it's all down to his ring IQ at the end of the day, and if the ring IQ can be sufficiently developed. Because, again, as an athlete, he's quite impressive. He's explosive when he lets his shots off. I saw a clip, maybe some of you guys have seen it, of Spencer Oliver wearing the big old-school Adam Booth platform boots that Adam Booth wore for taking David Haye on the pads when he was about to fight Nikolai Valoev. And I think he also wore them again when they were gearing up for the Klitschko fight. So Spencer Oliver, who's like 5'3" or something, in these big platform boots, taking David Adeleye on the pads. And Adeleye looked explosive as hell. Very sharp, very fast, explosive punches. Obviously, pads don't hit back, and pads are there to be hit, unlike an opponent. So it's one thing looking impressive on the pads, totally different looking impressive against an opponent in the ring. I obviously get that. But like I say, if he can somehow learn to utilize that explosiveness and that athleticism in his fights, which he really didn't show against Jamie Shakiva because he was just getting totally outboxed and outthought in there. He did show flashes of that explosiveness against Wardley. A lot of people are misremembering the way that fight went. I actually misremembered it. I went back and watched it a couple of months ago, watched it again. And truth be told, Adeleye did a lot better in that fight than I gave him credit for, and most people are still giving him credit for. He did a lot better against Wardley than people realize. Go back and watch the fight. It's on YouTube. He definitely won rounds in the fight. I saw some comment somewhere where somebody said Adeleye lost every round against Wardley, then got knocked out. That's total nonsense. Now, he won rounds in the fight. He was competitive, but he gassed out and Fabio Wardley got to him. Against Filip Hrgovic, it's kind of a no-lose situation for Adeleye because he was getting soundly outboxed by Shakiva. Shakiva was outboxing him, yeah, aka TKV. Shakiva was outboxing him far more soundly than Fabio Wardley. The Fabio Wardley fight was competitive. The Shakiva fight, Adeleye was getting his head boxed off. Shakiva was comfortable in there, for me. But he got maybe a little too comfortable, complacent, and Adeleye caught him with a hook. It was controversial. The British Boxing Board of Control ordered that they run it back. But rather than do that, Adeleye gets this offer to fight Filip Hrgovic and thinks, to hell with running it back against Shakiva, who could potentially beat me at domestic level. I might as well take a gamble for a load of money against Filip Hrgovic. If I lose, they'll say, oh, well, I was supposed to lose. And I get a load of money for my troubles. If I win, I've hit the big time. So you can understand why David Adeleye is taking this fight. For Filip Hrgovic, he was apparently offered loads of money as well for taking a random matchup against Adeleye. He says that Martin Bakole, in fact, let me get a thumbnail up here. This is actually hilarious. Look at the text on the thumbnail. It's a quote from Filip Hrgovic talking about Martin Bakole. He says, he had one good fight, then gained 500 pounds and bought the whole Gucci shop. That pretty much sums up what Martin Bakole did after beating Jared Anderson. I like the exaggeration, the sarcasm from Filip Hrgovic. Bakole gained 500 pounds and bought the whole Gucci shop. Yes. So he says that prior to being offered the Adeleye fight, I guess Turki Al-Sheikh offered Filip Hrgovic the Bakole fight. He says he agreed to it, but then it was offered to Bakole and Bakole turned it down. I don't think Bacoli has denied this. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think he's tried to say that he wouldn't have enough time to be in shape or whatever the case may be. Okay. He doesn't want to make the same mistake that he made when he took the Joseph Parker fight on just over a day's notice. And speaking of Martin Bacoli, he did this interview the other day on Seconds Out. Not sure how many of you guys have seen this. It's kind of a little odd. The interview was conducted in Congo, where Martin Bacoli's from, and it's got these like two heavies in the background. Security or something. They look like government security. African government security. I don't know why they're in there, but they're like mean mugging in the background while Radio Raheem is doing this interview with Bacoli. It's quite weird. But anyway, Bacoli starts venting his frustration at his inability to secure big fights. And he says if he can't get a big fight within the next 12 months, he's going to retire and, end up doing some business stuff rather than boxing. And it's a really curious thing for Martin Bacoli to say, because the only person he's got to blame is himself and, well, perhaps his manager and trainer, Billy Nelson. Because the Ajagba fight was originally supposed to be an IBF final eliminator. That was locked in. So all he had to do was get himself in shape for that fight. And I think he would have had about 2.5 months, 3 months to get in shape for the Ajagba fight. But instead, he went on a side mission to fight Joseph Parker when he was totally out of shape, jeopardizing his mandatory position, getting himself knocked out in the second round in the process. And then he's complaining about not getting opportunities. He had an opportunity against the Jagba to become IBF mandatory. And the IBF enforced their mandatories, in most cases, more strictly than the other sanctioning bodies do. He threw it all away because he thought he could rob the bank with some fast money. He and his trainer-manager, Billy Nelson. So he would have been in a big fight that he was adequately prepared for, or at least had enough time to prepare for, if he just followed that original date for the Ajagba fight. He threw it all away because of bad advice, stupidity, greed, whatever you want to call it. So him lamenting and saying, oh, these guys don't want to fight me and I'm going to retire if I don't get a big fight, I just shake my head. Seriously, I shake my head when Martin Bacoli's coming out saying this kind of stuff. But what say you guys in the live chat? Okay, we got some super chats here. Let's get onto these first. Shout out to Jack Trussler for the super chat. He says, big up Hatman, I got Carl Thompson, David Hay vibes with this Whyte Itauma fight. Can you give a shout out to my dad, Rich? He says, you know your boxing. Shout out to Jack Trussler's dad, Rich. Rich Trussler or just Rich? Shout out to you, my friend. Appreciate the support. And yeah, I spoke about the David Hay, Carl Thompson fight earlier on in the stream, because Matt Borgerson is saying he thinks Itauma's going to get chinned by Dillian Whyte in this fight. And I said that's not beyond the realms of possibility at all. We've seen it in the past, and then I brought up the example of David Hay getting stopped by Carl Thompson. So we see these kind of things, yeah? A young, hot prospect with loads of hype behind him and a lot of talent, because David Hay had talent. Going in there against a grizzled vet and getting old manned and taken out. Yeah, it could happen. Dillian Whyte has come in shape. Dillian Whyte is a very proud, very determined man, a very fierce man. He's got a strong will, Dillian Whyte. So it could happen. But personally, I think Itauma will do the business. It might take a little longer than some people are expecting, possibly. But I'm saying he gets it done inside 7 rounds. Shout out to Jack Trussler and his dad, Rich. Big up Matt Borgerson. He says, I think Adeleye versus Hrgovic is going to be boring. Okay, that's an interesting take. It might be. Hrgovic throws a lot of shots. I saw some boxing pundit claimed that Hrgovic doesn't throw many shots. That's absolute nonsense. Hrgovic has got a very high punch output. Very high. The reason he gets tired in fights is because it's maybe too high. Especially early on, where he comes out all guns blazing, empties the tank, and then he's plodding around the ring for the rest of the fight, knackered. So, no, Hrgovic has normally got a high punch output. Adeleye doesn't. Adeleye has a low punch output normally. But, you know, since Hrgovic likes to throw a lot of shots, and he's got a good chin, and he knows he's got a good chin, he tends to fight somewhat recklessly and take chances. Adeleye might be able to capitalize on some of those chances that Hrgovic takes. Yeah, because Hrgovic is a guy, I mean, I saw an interview with him earlier on today. And believe it or not, Hrgovic said that he hasn't been impressed with anyone's power that he's fought so far as a heavyweight. He said he wasn't impressed by Dubois' power, wasn't impressed by... He said he didn't feel Zhang's power. I think he did feel Zhang's power. Even though the knockdown in the first round was bogus, that was not a knockdown. Zhang literally pulled him round the back of the head with almost an open palm. And Hrgovic went down on a knee. It's like, that's not a knockdown. But anyway, they counted it as a knockdown. It was a 10-8 for Zhang. I'm talking about punches, much harder shots than that. Shots that actually landed on the target area with the knuckles. Hrgovic got hit with a lot of clean shots later on in the fight from Zhang. And he wasn't wobbling around the ring, but I think they affected him. I think they did buzz him, stun him, and what have you. Obviously, he was able to take him still. He took him a lot better than Joe Joyce took him. So Hrgovic has definitely got a very good chin. I've been saying this for the longest time. Definitely got a very good chin. But at some point, these guys with very good chins end up irreparably damaged. Their punch resistance gets irreparably damaged because of their cavalier attitude in the ring, where they're like, I'm not afraid to get hit. I can take a shot, you know? Eventually your punch resistance wears down when you continue fighting like that. Will we see signs of it in the Adeleye fight? We'll see, because Adeleye is very explosive, particularly with single shots, especially the left hook. But as I said from the moment the fight was made, I'm still expecting Filip Hrgovic to win. I do not expect Adeleye to have his hand raised at the end. But stranger things have happened. You know, it's boxing, and in particular, heavyweight boxing. When you're dealing with a guy that has punching power, he's always in with a shot. Even if it's a slim shot, he's always in with something of a shot. So let's see what happens. But I'm picking Hrgovic to get the job done. Shout out to Matt Borgerson again. He says, Bacoli needs to focus on winning, not the gym wars. Yeah, he's still banging on about sparring stories. He beat up Usyk in sparring. There was blood everywhere and all this kind of business. Yeah, he definitely needs to get away from that. Nobody is impressed. Nobody wants to hear that, because over the years, there have been a lot of great gym fighters who couldn't reproduce that same form under the bright lights where it counts. Yeah? I've mentioned before many times Steve Lott, who was a member of Team Mike Tyson in the early championship years, and even before he became champion. Steve Lott used to have a YouTube channel, which unfortunately was removed after Steve Lott passed away. But on that YouTube channel, he posted loads of full sparring sessions from Mike Tyson's prime. And several of these sparring sessions were with Jesse Ferguson. This was after he stopped Ferguson, right? He got Ferguson in as a sparring partner. And I'd heard these rumors over the years that Ferguson was a really good gym fighter. And if you saw those sparring sessions with Jesse Ferguson, there was at least 2 of them, maybe 3 of them. If you saw those sparring sessions with Jesse Ferguson, he looked so good against the prime Mike Tyson in sparring that I was thinking at first, who the hell is this guy? Why have I never heard of him before? And then I realized, hang on, that's Jesse Ferguson. And indeed, Steve Lott was answering comments. People were so impressed by how good this guy looked against Mike Tyson in sparring. He was giving Tyson the business in one of the sparring sessions, absolutely giving him the business. And I'm there thinking, where was that type of form when they actually fought? Because Jesse Ferguson didn't really do much to Mike Tyson when they actually fought. But in the gym, he was lighting Mike up like a Christmas tree in one of them sessions. He looked electric. And he always had this reputation, even back in the 90s, of being a great gym fighter. But he just couldn't reproduce that same form under the bright light. He just couldn't do it. Another great gym fighter from back in the days was Maurice Harris. Again, speaking of Mike Tyson said that, and this was in the 90s after Mike Tyson came out of prison, that Maurice Harris was kicking his butt every day in sparring for the whole training camp. Was absolutely kicking his butt. But if you look at Maurice Harris's record and you look at his fights, you'd never imagine a guy like that would be kicking Mike Tyson's butt in the gym, you know? He famously got knocked out by Derek Jefferson in a slugfest. Horrible KO. So, you get fighters who are gym fighters and they produce their best form in the gym, but they can't do it under the bright lights. Maybe Martin Bakoli's one of those guys. And he's making us think he's one of those guys by banging on about this sparring so much. Shout out to Matt Borgerson. Shout out to Agni for the super chat. He says, Partridge's arms have gotten skinnier since Wilder 2. I can see that. Yeah, his body has changed since Wilder 2. Wilder 2 was the last time that he looked solid, or somewhat, solid by his standards. And he looked athletic. I'm not saying he wasn't athletic after Wilder 2, but he looked somewhat athletic in the second Wilder fight. So I know exactly what you're talking about. But he's such a glutton in between fights. He blows up in weight. He drinks alcohol and gets drunk out of his face and all that kind of stuff constantly. And that has led to his body ending up the way that it is. It isn't just the aging process. It's how you live as you age. And Tyson Fury is not a clean liver. That's why his body's ended up mash up like that, looking like an old man's body, probably before its time, because he just doesn't take care of himself, balloons up in weight all the time, so on and so forth. Shout out to Agni. Big up Mr. Luca, he says, need to see Caballero snatch Bakoli's bulbous body. Yeah, based upon what we've seen of Bakoli in recent times, maybe Caballero could stop him. But I still think if Bakoli can ever reproduce the form that he displayed against Jared Anderson, I know Anderson was green and defensively underdeveloped, but from an offensive perspective, Bakoli was pretty impressive in that fight. He was sharp, We haven't seen Bakoli that sharp since. Certainly wasn't in the Parker fight for obvious reasons, but even against a Jagba, he wasn't that sharp. So I still think the Anderson version of Bakoli can do damage in certain fights against certain opponents. Maybe even Caballero, but maybe Bakoli's shot is load. Pause. Maybe he's peaked and now he's on the downslide. It's very possible with these fighters who balloon and yo-yo in weight. Carlton Palmer's asking, how tall is Moses officially? I think he's officially 6'4". Mr. Lucas says, if Bakoli can get down to 270, maybe he can have a good fight with Caballero. Yeah, I think so. If he can get down to 270 safely and healthily, then I reckon it's a good fight. Spark says Bacoli is just not motivated anymore. It can happen. I compared him in a previous live stream to like a Cuban heavyweight, because that's what the Cuban heavyweights used to be like. As soon as they started tasting some of that American freedom and hanging out in Little Havana in Miami, having enough money, well, I mean, on the way up, they think they've already made it when they're taking on journeymen and stuff like that, because they're able to live a standard of life which they could only dream of in Cuba. You know, like a pretty standard middle-class existence in America is like hitting the lottery for the average Cuban. Do you know what I mean? Because they're very, very impoverished. So these Cubans would go over to the United States, get a little taste of freedom, and obviously freedom is all relative, but compared to Cuba, incredible freedom in the United States. And they just start gorging on food, because again, in Cuba, food is, I mean, the portions they're eating are a lot smaller. They can't afford a lot of food, so on and so forth. That's why they're all in shape. When they come over off the boat from Cuba, they're always in shape. You know, they're living hand to mouth. But as soon as they touch down in America, they start hitting all the fast food restaurants, hanging out in Little Havana, you know, wearing Hawaiian shirts with a hamburger meat chest and a gold chain and the big sunglasses like Tony Montana. This is what these Cuban heavyweights were like, bro. And all of a sudden, they start expanding faster than the universe as far as their waistline, you know. Odlanier Solis being a prime example. Prior to him, you had people like Jorge Luis Gonzalez. Even Mike Perez was like that as a heavyweight. You know, man, one prize fighter and then ate himself into oblivion. He's in shape now as a cruiserweight, but as a heavyweight, after he won prize fighter, he got like 35 grand. And yeah, he just ate himself into obscurity. So Martin Bacoli's a bit like that, and Exactamundo saying Andy Ruiz. Yeah, Andy Ruiz, man. What a waste of talent Andy Ruiz is. Just a complete glutton. There are many fighters over the years who have eaten their careers away. Eating their careers away. So let's move on then to the next topic of conversation here, and it is the main event, which we have talked about a bit already. Dillian Whyte versus Moses Itauma. Itauma 12-0. Dillian Whyte 31-3. So Whyte vastly more experienced than Moses Itauma. Fought at a much higher level. Been in much tougher fights. This is really a case, and they laid it out well on TalkSport, of timing. Has Itauma got Dillian Whyte at the right time? Or has Dillian Whyte got Itauma at the right time when he's still a bit green? We'll find out on Saturday. I personally think Itauma's got Dillian Whyte at the right time rather than Whyte getting Itauma at the right time. Look at Dillian Whyte's activity over the past few years. He got busted again for PEDs, which put him out for over a year. But anyway, knocked out by Povetkin in 2020. Fights in 2021 once. The revenge win over Povetkin. Fights twice in 2022. Getting knocked out by Tyson Fury. And then getting that majority decision over Jermaine Franklin in a very close fight, where he didn't impress. And Dillian Whyte was in pretty good shape against Jermaine Franklin. People are talking about the amazing shape that Whyte is in for Itauma. He was in similar shape against Franklin. Go back and look at the fight. Then he takes 2 years out because he fails a PED test again. So he was on some type of ban, I'm assuming. Comes back against Christian Hammer. Looks pedestrian. Comes back, then fights Ebenezer Tete later on the same year, 2024, and looks god-awful. Against Hammer, he looked pedestrian, but against Tete, he looked god-awful. There was nothing on his left hook. He was struggling with a guy who Fraser Clark blasted out in a round. I think it was Tete's next fight, or maybe a fight or two after. So it's the same version of Tete. Fraser Clark, who's not a noted puncher, dispatched of him in 1 round. Dillian Whyte hit him with all sorts of shots. Tete wasn't going anywhere. It was eventually stopped, but Tete never went down. Not to my recollection anyway. And he kept hitting Tete with the left hook over and over again, and nothing was happening. And Tete was swarming all over Dillian Whyte. I don't see a guy in this type of form turning the clock back to be the Dillian Whyte who fought Joseph Parker. I just don't see it. If he was going to produce that kind of form, he would have produced it against Fury. He would have produced it against Franklin. Remember, after the Fury fight, he's coming back from a knockout defeat. So if ever he was going to put his best foot forward, it would have been against Jermaine Franklin. And that was 3 years ago. He couldn't put his best foot forward against Jermaine Franklin. What makes people think he can do it now? So, look, I'm not counting Dillian Whyte out completely. Anyone who can punch, which is most heavyweights, has got a chance. And yes, you look back and remember the likes of David Haye losing to Carl Thompson, and people are getting similar vibes here, apparently. We will see on Saturday, but personally, nah, I'm expecting Moses to do the business. I think he'll knock Dillian Whyte out at some point within the first 7 rounds. Shout out to everyone locked in the live chat. Man, these tabs are crashing more than normal on Firefox. God, you're killing me, Firefox. What's going on? Here we go, we're back in business. Galaxy Edit says, do you think these rumors about Moses' chin are true? I've got no idea. I've got absolutely no idea. Because on one hand, you're hearing that he's got chin issues. But on the other hand, Anthony Yard, who's been watching Itauma spar in the gym for many years, he's been watching Itauma spar since he was, I think he said 17 or 18, behind the scenes, and he's been at his fights. Anthony Yard on TalkSport said that Itauma can take a punch. He said he's seen him in the gym against top heavyweights and he can take a shot. Then there was Gareth A. Davis. Maybe he's got some inside info. But he said, and he kind of let it slip. He said, Itauma can take a shot. When he goes down, he gets up and keeps fighting. And he was talking about this in the context of sparring stories that he's either heard or spars that he's witnessed. So he kind of tried to style it out after he said that. But I think he's got knowledge of maybe Itauma getting dropped, but getting back up to continue the sparring, give the other guy the business. So, yeah, we'll find out. Getting dropped in sparring is not a big deal as long as you're able to recover quick enough. It's when you're getting dropped and they have to stop the spar. I mean, it can happen to any heavyweight, to be fair. But if that's happening on a regular basis, if you're like an AJ who gets dropped and doesn't recover, it takes a long time to recover, then it's a real issue. But most heavyweights have been dropped in sparring. Most of the greatest heavyweights of all time got dropped in sparring. So when you factor that in and of itself, it's not really that big a deal. It depends on how it happens, I mean, Usyk apparently was dropped in sparring by Martin Bakole. Usyk and his team have never denied it. You know, maybe that did happen, but Bakole hasn't been able to reproduce that type of form in fights, and Alexander Usyk is still unbeaten. So there you go. And Alexander Usyk hasn't been down from a body shot since the Beterbiev fight, because the punch in the Daniel Dubois first fight was a low blow, blatantly. But there was this narrative that he can't take it to the body. Well, what did Tyson Fury do? He tried to go to Usyk's body. Did he manage to drop him? No, he didn't. In 24 rounds of going to Usyk's body, he couldn't put him on the canvas. Daniel Dubois went to the body against Usyk a few times in their rematch. Couldn't put him on the canvas. Sometimes you just catch a guy right, you know, when he isn't necessarily vulnerable to the chin or to the body. A guy who, I mean, I'm not saying Usyk has the greatest resistance to the midriff of all the heavyweights out there, but I think that his vulnerability to the body was a little overstated, maybe even by me. You know, looking at subsequent fights, he's been hitting the body plenty of times and he's taking it just okay, you know, just fine. Particularly in that first Fury fight, he took plenty of body shots and he was okay. So, yeah, I think we overstated that a bit. He's not a Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman's genuinely got some kind of issue taking body shots. Yeah, it's been over and over again in Thurman's career. As soon as he gets touched to the body, he's like doubling over in pain and running around the ring and stuff like that. Keith Thurman takes a better headshot than he does a body shot. It's always been like that with him. Usyk is not as vulnerable to the body as a Keith Thurman. And also Usyk is such a maniacal trainer that since he knew that Partridge was going to target his body in their first fight, he probably would have done an extra 1,000 sit-ups a day or something ridiculous. You know what I mean? More conditioning with the medicine ball, because his training regime is already insane as it is. He probably would have upped it to a next level in anticipation that Partridge was really going to go to his waist. Matt Borgerson says, you see Boots fighting a cab driver? Insane. Who's the opponent? Because I heard Eddie Hearn talk about Boots' next opponent, but he didn't name the guy. He just said that people are going to complain. That's all he said. But so who is the guy? What's the guy's name? Spark says, can we talk about Partridge a bit more, please? Okay. Black Dynamite says his name is it Ulasima Lima? Never heard of him. Ulasima Lima. Absolutely never heard of him. Let me look him up now. Jaron Ennis. Let me look up this Lima character. Oh yeah, there he is. Uisima. Is it Uisima? I'm not sure how to pronounce that first name. Uisima Lima. At least his first name and last name rhyme. A 32-year-old from Portugal. IBO super welterweight champion. Oh dear, he's an IBO champion. You have a look at his record here. So, most of his fights have been in Europe, in his native Portugal, also Spain. He's fought in the UK a few times. Okay, he lost to Aaron McKenna. Oh dear. So he lost to Aaron McKenna. And don't get it twisted, Aaron McKenna's a good fighter, but still. Lost to McKenna on a UD over 10 in 2023. And other than that, he's fought nobody. In fact, he fought a Indian guy with a crazy first name. I mean, no offense or anything, but he fought an Indian guy in 2024 in Toronto, Canada, with the first name Suckdeep. Pause. Yeah. Man's first name is literally Suckdeep. That's wild. So yeah, I see what you're saying, Matt. It's not a good look, is it, for Boots Ennis to be fighting a guy like this? And there's back and forth between Boots Ennis and Virgil Ortiz's people. Ortiz's people are saying Boots Ennis ducked. But Boots Ennis's people, as in Eddie Hearn, he's saying, no, Boots Ennis will fight Virgil Ortiz next. We're ready to go. It's Ortiz's people that are, you know, trying to talk the way out of the fight or whatever the case may be. I don't know, man. Exactamundo says, does he have a sister? And Circle says, that is a name you should change as fast as you can. That's a whole fact. Oh, here we go with the Indian questions again. Suckdeep is a crazy name, bro. Could Dillian Whyte have lost the weight too fast? Well, he says he came into camp in shape. If that's true, then maybe not. Because he says that his trainer, Buddy McGirt, is always complaining that he comes into camp overweight. So for this fight, he said, I'll get in shape and lose all the weight before camp so that in camp we can just focus on technical things and sparring. Black Dynamite says, with a name like Suckdeep, I know he had to learn how to fight. Shout out to D-Man for the super chat. He says, Andy Ruiz versus Itauma. How does that go for you? We'll learn a lot more about Itauma after the Dillian Whyte fight, but I can see how stylistically Itauma beats Andy Ruiz, even in his prime. Because I don't think the southpaw angles line up well for Ruiz. I think we saw that in the Ortiz fight. Yeah, he did drop Ortiz a couple of times. But outside of those explosive moments where he managed to drop Ortiz, Ruiz was having a lot of trouble against Luis Ortiz. A lot of trouble. And those knockdowns really saved him in the fight, you know? So I don't think the southpaw style, the southpaw stance suits Ruiz anywhere near as well as the orthodox stance. That's right. Dillian Whyte is once again fighting in Argos. Fighting in Argos. Yeah, I agree with King KO. If Itauma has the intangibles, the stamina, the chin, enough heart, I think he beats Ruiz. But those are ifs, you know? We'll find out. Perhaps we'll find out more about Itauma on Saturday against Dillian Whyte. I think there is the potential there for Dillian Whyte to ask him some questions in the early going. Shout out to Orca for the super chat. He says, I secretly picked Lima to beat Singh. I'm from the same gym. Thoughts on the recent news with the Ali Act hat man? Shout out to Orca. the news with the Ali Act, I actually covered this in a previous stream. I read through a interview with a sports lawyer who was warning about the dangers of these changes to the Ali Act. It's concerning, of course, because it removes rights from fighters. It allows promoters to act almost with impunity if these amendments to the Ali Act go through. And bear in mind, Dana White, who's one of the people that wants to get these amendments done, is apparently quite close with President Trump. So there might be some influence there. However, it should be noted that the Ali Act only applies in the United States. And in the UK, for example, the Ali Act doesn't apply. Yet, we can't say that fighters are getting treated badly, at least not by the big promoters on the whole. In the UK, they're treated fairly well. They're not exploited like UFC fighters are exploited, and that's with no Ali Act. But of course, the UK and the United States are different cultures. There's different influences there. And in the United States in particular, you got the influence of Dana White, who would love to implement a similar model to his UFC model in boxing. And that involves basically completely controlling the fighters. So they have no autonomy whatsoever. But in order to be allowed to do that, the Ali Act needs to be amended because I don't know how many people are aware, the Ali Act doesn't currently cover MMA. In fact, there's been MMA fighters that have been campaigning to get the Ali Act expanded to cover MMA. There's some type of union. I read about that in the interview that I read out during a previous live stream. Some of you guys may remember it. So, yeah, it's troubling. Hopefully, it doesn't get passed. Because if it does, yeah, Dana White is going to be up to all sorts of no good. Shout out to Orca for the super chat. Big up Suited and Booted. He says, great channel. Toughest nightclub you bounced at. Toughest nightclub I bounced at. I would say, I'm not going to name the club because there's stuff which I talked about in my Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. There's a particular story I told, and I don't know the legal ramifications if I name the club. All I'll tell you is there was a nightclub, and it's not Ministry, but it was a nightclub in the Elephant and Castle area, which was very, very rough back in the days. Very rough. All right. All sorts of gangsters and, South London Road guys and all that used to go there. And there was a particular incident that happened there, which, I won't go into here. But yeah, there was a club in Elephant and Castle back in the days. It was very rough. There was so many shootings along that particular stretch of road during that period. It was like every week there were shootings happening there. There were flowers along Woolworth Road on a regular basis. I mean, getting, when somebody passes away, the family and friends and whatnot will put flowers down on the place where they fell. But yeah, there was a club in Elephant and Castle that was probably the roughest. But quite a lot of the places I worked were rough, Even some of the more upmarket places, because that's where a lot of the roadmen that had money wanted to party. They didn't want to always party in little hood clubs. They wanted to go to the nice places. And they would turn up in their Prada and Versace and all that type of stuff. And bad stuff could happen, even in nice clubs. So, Yeah, shout out to Suited and Booted for the super chat. Shout out to Danny, says, have you ever watched Narcos? Episode 1 will have you hooked. 5-star. I think I watched a bit of an episode, but like I've said previously, I'm not that interested in series and movies about drug dealing. You know? Maybe there's a couple of exceptions, but not really because of the drug dealing element. I mean, the first season of Top Boy was cool. Now it's called Top Boy. They've renamed it. Now it's called Top Boy Summer House to differentiate it from the later seasons of Top Boy, which have Drake's involvement. So Top Boy Summer House, as they call it now, was pretty good. But other than that, like I said, I'm really not that interested in series and movies about drug dealers. It bores me, you know? It bores me, to be honest. Because I've seen so many of those kind of movies over the years. Scarface from the 1980s and Goodfellas. And I mean, it's been done to death, that genre. So I'm not that interested in that kind of thing, to be honest. And I grew up around all that, you know? It's like a lot of people are really fascinated by it for their whole lives. They'll reach my age and they'll still be fascinated by drug dealing movies. And I'm like, bro, aren't you over that by now? Like, I don't know. I guess maybe in my teens and 20s, I'll be more likely to watch something like that. But at this big age, I like to watch stuff that's more mentally stimulating, you know? Shout out to Suited and Booted. He says, great content as always. Wish casuals would take the rose-tinted glasses off. Great saying. Some of the comments I read really make me laugh. Are you alluding to the stuff they're saying about Usyk? Saying, oh, he's not a top 10 of all-time heavyweight and he couldn't have beaten this one and Lennox Lewis would have dusted him off comfortably. That's what Simon Jordan keeps saying. Lewis would have had no problem with Usyk whatsoever. I think he needs to go back and watch some of Lennox Lewis's fights. Lennox Lewis was a great fighter. But outside of the 2 losses he had, which he, yes, did avenge, he had plenty of trouble against other guys. Frank Bruno gave him plenty of trouble. Shannon Briggs gave him plenty of trouble. Zeljko Mavrovic gave him plenty of trouble. Ray Mercer gave him plenty of trouble. Like, if these guys are giving him a load of trouble, why would he just go in there and comfortably handle Usyk? I don't see it. I don't see it at all. So yeah, rose-tinted glasses from the Simon Jordans of the world, even Duke McKenzie on that. And Duke McKenzie is fantastic at predicting fights, but yeah, the rose-tinted glasses are in full effect. Shout out to Suited and Booted. Big up Matthew Wilson for the super chat. He says, I heard a YouTuber say that Whyte is in as good a shape as he was against AJ. Or I heard a YouTube say, that Whyte is in as good a shape as he was against AJ. From what I can remember, Whyte wasn't in good shape against AJ. That's correct. He wasn't in particularly good shape. He wasn't that heavy against AJ. I think he might have been about 245. So in weight terms, it was a decent weight for Dillian Whyte historically. But his body composition wasn't great. He came in with an injured left shoulder. His body was kind of flabby and lacking muscle definition. He weighed a similar amount, I think, in the Chisora fights. Maybe bang on the same amount. But he had more muscle and less fat. So he looked aesthetically in better shape, and I'm sure was in better shape as far as cardio as well, cardiovascular. So you make a good point. Whyte wasn't in good shape against AJ. If you go back and look at the Jermaine Franklin fight, to me, he looks in similar shape to what he was in there. Like, aesthetically, he was in pretty good shape against Jermaine Franklin. But it didn't help. I mean, he still struggled badly. And we've got a very relevant comparison because AJ went in there against Jermaine Franklin and had basically no trouble whatsoever. Okay, it wasn't one of AJ's most scintillating performances. He did get a bloody nose early in the fight. But he barely lost a round against Franklin. He might have lost a round or two. And other than that, he was just totally outboxing Franklin. Whereas Dillian Whyte went life and death with him. I know styles make fights, but still. That wasn't a very convincing display from the body snatcher. Do you know what I mean? Yes, Debiaka. Dillian was also taking painkilling injections before the AJ fight. That's right. He was injured. He wasn't in the greatest cardiovascular shape, etc., etc. And Circle says, Simon Partridge is head and shoulders above the rest. Jordan really needs to go away. Andy Hall says, I keep noticing over and over again that when it gets nearer to a fight and the promotion involved, it seems natural for people to start doubting their initial thoughts. So I think Whyte gets laid out. Yeah, I mean, in the live streams that I did in the run-up to Usyk Dubois 2, there was a lot of people picking Dubois to win. There was a lot of people who believed that it was Dubois' time and he was going to stop Usyk. Loads and loads of people made that prediction the closer we got to that fight. And, well, Usyk went in there and demolished Daniel Dubois. So could it be a similar situation here? We'll find out on Saturday, but I'm sticking to my original prediction. I don't feel any need, any inclination to stray from it. I think Moses Itauma stops Dillian Whyte or knocks him out within 7 rounds. He might get asked some questions early on when Dillian Whyte is fresh, but it won't take that many rounds for Dillian Whyte to start getting sloppy. And when he does, Itauma will be there with far more accurate shots, powerful shots. And I think poor Dillian Whyte goes down and may not get up. Exactamundo says, I like Jordan. He's a character. He looks like one of the puppets from Spitting Image. Michael says, I think Turkey's plan is to put Itauma versus Usyk and Partridge versus AJ. It may well be, but I don't think Partridge wants to play ball. I don't think he wants to fight AJ. He wants Usyk if he can get it. Suited and Booted says, ever been offered a gig on DAZN or Box Nation or Sky? I think you have mentioned it before. Maybe a video with Ade down the line. Or is that not your thing? I was approached in the past couple of months. I'm not going to say by who, but it's by a major organization in boxing. I didn't like the offer. You know, I didn't like in order for me to actually work for someone, the money would have to be fantastic. And the money they were coming with was not fantastic. It was all right, but not fantastic enough for me to give up my independence and work for somebody. It needs to be absolutely fantastic. And the most laughable offer that I received in the past was, believe it or not, I won't go into too much detail, but believe it or not, the most laughable offer I received in the past was from Team Partridge. I kid you not. It was from Team Partridge, but not Luke. It was from Team Huey Partridge. Yeah, Team Huey Partridge reached out to me back in the days and made me an offer to promote one of Huey Partridge's fights on my channel. And when I looked at what they were offering me, I didn't even reply. I was actually insulted. They were treating me like I should be some type of fanboy or something and just do the promotion because I'm so happy to meet Huey Partridge. Like, it was bizarre. If you ain't talking money, I mean, come on. Don't waste my time. Don't fill up my inbox with silly offers about putting me up in hotels and getting to meet and greet Huey Partridge. Like I care about any of that. Yeah, that was one of the most absurd offers ever. Big up Ocean Blue for the super chat. He says, I doubt Whyte will be having a beer can. Beer can. That's how Jamaicans say the word bacon. Just say beer and can. Beer can. That's bacon in Jamaican. In Jamaican English. Yeah, I doubt Whyte will be having a beer can bap for breakfast on fight day, given the location. Oh, indeed. No beer can out there. Big up Ocean Blue. Ryan Emer says, I don't mind Simon Jordan so much. It's Spencer Oliver that annoys me because he's so dumb. I concur. I agree with that. Simon Jordan's okay. At times he says very silly things, but for the most part, I think he's cool. Now that the Partridge hype train has basically come to an end, Simon Jordan's more bearable now. He's all right now. But yeah, Spencer Oliver is so dumb. He's literally like, somebody mentioned the Muppets earlier. Spencer Oliver reminds me of a Muppet. I mean, he is a Muppet, but, you know, literally like one of the Muppets, or there used to be a show called Fraggle Rock. And Spencer Oliver reminds me of a Fraggle. He's got very, very low intelligence, and it is annoying. Because he never seems to understand people's comments and questions a lot of the time of his co-hosts. You know, he's constantly like misunderstanding them and giving answers that don't pertain to the question. Shout out to Agni for the super chat. He says, hey, the funniest British trash talker of all time. Maybe yes. Maybe yes. Maybe. But then again, Dillian Whyte is a good trash talker. He's given us some good trash talk over the years, as has Derek Chisora, but particularly Dillian Whyte. Dillian Whyte's been a real good trash talker. So I would say it's between Dillian Whyte and David Hay for greatest UK trash talker. Between Whyte and Hay. Because Partridge, some of his trash talk back in the day was funny, but when you look back in retrospect, his heyday of trash talk lasted about 2 years or something. Do you know what I mean? And after that, he weren't funny ever again. So we can strike Partridge from the list of candidates. What other British fighters were good trash talkers? Shout out to Bobs for the super chat. He says, glad you turned down that offer. Your channel has hidden reach in the industry. True Geordie, etc. has referenced it if you listen carefully. Yeah, True Geordie actually turned up in the live chat, one of my streams. I think it was last year. And he said in that live chat that he's been watching my videos for years, and I actually inspired him to start making boxing videos, because before he was doing, you know, other stuff and MMA videos and whatnot. And he said he watched my videos for a long time and it inspired him to do what he's doing. So yeah, big up Bobs for the super chat. And yeah, the recent offer, I mean, come on. And the Partridge offer, That was just laughable. Yeah, off-brand Partridge. Huey Partridge. Shades of Partridge. Encircled says, why would anyone care about meeting Huey? What are you going to talk about with him? His back acne? Carlton Palmer says, to be fair, Spencer did suffer a brain injury. Indeed, he did. But that doesn't mean we need to suffer him as a pundit. You know? If the brain injury has contributed to him being that mentally simple, why has he got a job as a pundit? Do you know what I mean? Like, we're not supposed to suffer him just out of pity and put up with terrible takes and low IQ because he suffered an injury back in the days. Let him work behind the scenes or something. Make the tea. I don't know. I'm thinking from the perspective of a viewer, you know, a consumer of their content. I don't want to see a guy talk absolute rubbish. I don't care how he ended up with such a primitive brain. I don't want to hear him messing things up all the time. and Simon Jordan's always ribbing Spencer Oliver for being dumb all the time. I remember it might have been in the first episode of their podcast, Simon Jordan was alluding to Spencer Oliver's extremely low IQ. Yeah. Shout out to Ash. Big up Bite Size Boxing. Yeah, the only adverts I run on my channel, as in, you know, plugs, are for my content. I plug my content. That's about it. Wave says, what about Aloy's Hatman, the bad boy from Penge, best British trash talker? I'm sure you're being sarcastic. Mac B says, Hatman, what would you say was Floyd's biggest weakness inside the ring? I would say his pressure fighting skills were quite primitive. When he was forced to fight somebody with longer arms and walk him down, he was a very, very basic pressure fighter. He just come forward behind a high guard and throw straight right hands. And that's one of the reasons I've always felt that he would have lost in a fantasy matchup to Tommy Hearns. Because that strategy, as far as I'm concerned, is not going to be effective against Tommy Hearns. Shout out to Samil for the super chat. He says, top 10 at the moment heavyweights off the dome. Well, Usyk at number 1. Who would you put at number 2? Caballel, Joseph Parker 3. At number 4, who would I put? Maybe Philip Hrgovic at 4. No, Dubois at 4 still. Hrgovic 5. Who would I put after that? Let me look at the of all time. Because you said ATM, which I assume means at the moment. Yeah, Mark Hatch says you said ATM. Of all time, ATM all-time great, or all-time great would be ATG, not ATM. Big up Suited and Booted. Yes, everyone hit the likes if you could. All-time great top 10. I'm going to base it on resume. Muhammad Ali, number 1. People won't like this, but I'm going to say Lennox Lewis, number 2. I'm basing it mostly on resume. Ali 1, Lennox Lewis 2. Joe Louis 3. Evander Holyfield 4. Larry Holmes 5. George Foreman 6. Vladimir and Vitaly maybe 7 and 8. Sonny Liston 9. No, Joe Frazier 9, Sonny Liston 10. Something like that. People are saying Holyfield 4. Well, yeah, Holyfield beat Riddick Bowe. He beat Mike Tyson. He beat Ray Mercer. He beat Michael Moorer in the rematch. The place says, oh, Mike Tyson didn't make your top 10. I forgot to mention Mike Tyson. Okay. Yeah, Mike Tyson would make my top 10. I'd put so kick Sonny Liston out and put Mike Tyson in at about number 8 or 9. I think Tyson in at maybe 9, and then have Joe Frazier at 10. Now I'm kicking Liston out of the top 10 and replacing him with Mike Tyson. I'm putting Tyson above Liston and Joe Frazier, basically. So there, Mike Tyson will be 8 or something. Copzilla says Usyk. Well, you know, I'm doing this list off the top of my head real quick. I could make a case for putting Usyk in the top 10 too. Who could I swap out for Usyk in the top 10? Maybe swap him out for Foreman. Might swap him out for Foreman. Where did I put Foreman? Like number 6? Maybe swap Usyk out for Foreman or something. Mac B says, Hatman, Vlad's best win would be Povetkin, Hay, Pulev, Usyk beat Fury, Triple D, and Breeders. Surely that's a better resume than Vlad. But here's the thing. I also give points on a resume for longevity. Usyk has only fought 3 guys in championship fights. Yeah? Styles make fights in heavyweight boxing. Just because they're the 3 top guys, it doesn't mean that if he'd, let's say, had 16 heavyweight title fights, that he would have beaten everybody else that isn't as highly touted as the Partridges and the Dubois and the AJs. Do you know what I mean? So you give a guy extra credit on his resume for longevity. And Usyk, unfortunately, doesn't have that. So even though the wins are good, only 3 opponents in world championship fights. You know what I mean? Can I really put that above fighters who had a lot more world championship fights than that? It's a struggle in terms of resume. Do you know what I mean? It's a struggle. So I would have to put the Klitschko's in terms of resume above Usyk. Or Vladimir above Usyk in terms of resume because of the longevity. But in a fantasy matchup, I'd pick Usyk over both Klitschko's all day. Particularly Vladimir. Oh yeah, I'd pick him over Vladimir all day in a fantasy matchup. But that's just my opinion. But in terms of the resume, I still have to put Vladimir above him. Big up D-Man, he says, what's the most surprising element of Usyk's game? Somebody's already mentioned it there. Yeah, the physical strength. For a 220-something pound heavyweight, especially at his age, to be that physically strong is very surprising and very impressive. Very, very, very impressive. I mean, he showed it, firstly. He didn't really show it that much in the AJ fights because he didn't need to. They weren't very physical fights. You know, there wasn't that much inside work and leaning on. But against Partridge, first time around, he really showed that physical strength. He was able to shrug Partridge off whenever Partridge tried to clinch him. So yeah, his physical strength is really surprising, Usyk. Very, very physically strong. Big up D-Man for the super chat. Shout out to Agni for the super chat. He says, this doesn't get spoken about enough, but Partey first claimed to be the GOAT after beating Cunningham. I guess you meant to say Fury or Partridge. That's when the British public begged Hay to KO him. Yeah, I don't actually remember that. I'm not doubting what you're saying. I'm just saying I don't recall him saying that back then. And yeah, if that's the case, maybe some people did want Hay to knock him out partly because of that. Kayvon Green says, I would take Usyk over Fraser. Me too. Big up D-Dubs. Chief Wiggum says, might sound controversial, but only people to trouble Usyk is a fighter like Chisora, so I think Tyson could beat him. And that is also my take. I said this in a stream, I don't know, a couple months ago for the first time, that Mike Tyson might have the style and the intensity to beat Usyk. He might. Again, based upon that Chisora fight, when Chisora rushed him, Mike Tyson's so much faster than Chisora. Faster hand speed, faster foot speed. Better defensively. Hit harder, probably. Or at least in the same ballpark. Much faster with his combinations, much more precise. Way more dynamic. And he would come at you like a freight train in the early going. Although he never fought a southpaw. So we don't know how the angles would have lined up for him. But that is a difficult style matchup, I think, for Alexander Usyk at Prime Tyson. It's a difficult style matchup. But boxing is rock, paper, scissors, right? I personally think that Evander Holyfield, any version of Holyfield, during his heavyweight championship run, beats Mike Tyson, beats any version of Tyson. That's a controversial take for a lot of people. I just think Holyfield always had his number. As much as I think Holyfield would always beat any version of Tyson, I think Usyk beats any version of Holyfield. You know? Styles make fights, but then I think Tyson perhaps beats Usyk, or at least gives him a better fight than Holyfield would, in my opinion. Paleo says Tyson is a lot smaller though. Well, a lot smaller than Chisora, but he's about the same weight as Usyk. Mike Tyson in his prime weighed anywhere from 215 to about 222. I think he was 221 or 222 when he won the title against Berbick. So a very similar weight range to Usyk. So in terms of body mass, he and Usyk were not dissimilar. Obviously, Mike Tyson was a lot shorter. And I don't think Chisora's extra weight would have given him any advantage against Usyk versus Tyson. Do you know what I mean? I don't see what Chisora could do against Usyk that Mike Tyson couldn't do better. Yeah, Usyk is physically strong, but it's not just about the physical strength, because there were many fighters that were physically stronger than Mike Tyson that he faced. He was so fast and his balance was so good that he would offset their physical strength. Like Frank Bruno was physically stronger than Mike Tyson. Obviously, Frank Bruno a hell of a lot slower than Usyk, right? And Mike Tyson was strong himself. It's not like Mike Tyson was some weakling. He was very physically strong too. Usyk got to use that physical strength against Partridge, for example, when Partridge tried to clinch him. That's when you saw the strength. Outside of that, you weren't really seeing it, you know, because Usyk is not really a fighter that likes to engage in clinching. He likes to fight clean. So I don't think his physical strength, at least in the early rounds, would come into it against Tyson. I think he'd just be looking to get out of the way of bombs flying at him from all angles at ridiculous speed. I mean, Mike Tyson in the early rounds in his prime was scary, bro. Like, seriously, it was a madness. And that's why Mike Tyson even now is so revered, because he was one of these fighters that when he fought, you were guaranteed action from the opening bell. You didn't have to wait for a fight to get hot. It was hot immediately. As soon as the opening bell went, yeah. The only fight that wasn't like that was maybe Bone Crusher Smith. I mean, the first round was okay, but it quickly descended into a hug fest because of Smith. But other than that one, every fight from the opening bell for a Mike Tyson bout was electric. Win or lose, it was going to be a hell of a fight. Big up Kayvon Green for the super chat. He says, Tyson didn't hit hard, he was just crazy accurate. Oh, he definitely hit hard. But he didn't hit as hard as many other heavyweights. I mean, you're talking about guys 250, 260. When they load up and swing, of course, they're going to be landing with more power than Mike Tyson. But as you say, Tyson was accurate. He would hit you on the point of the chin, on the temple, and he would land clean. His shots were not coughing or scuffing punches. They were on the knuckle. He'd turn the shots over always, you know? So he was a very clean puncher, Mike Tyson, and had tremendous speed, great timing. When he knocked out Carl the Truth Williams, for example, in the first round, he dipped underneath the Carl the Truth Williams jab and countered with a ridiculously fast hook, left hook, and that was all she wrote. He threw a very similar shot against James Tillis. I think it was the first knockdown against Tillis. Did Tillis go down more than once in that fight? I forget now. I think he maybe only went down once, but yeah, the first knockdown, Tillis comes in and throws his left hook. That was his best punch, Tillis. He was a converted southpaw, James Quick Tillis. Throws this left hook. Mike Tyson ducks extremely quick and comes back with a reflexive left hook of his own to counter. So he was a fantastic counterpuncher on the front foot, Mike Tyson. Very, very fast and sharp at countering you coming forward. That's one of the reasons that he was, because he would make you miss. See, normally the dynamic in most bouts where you have a pressure fighter is the boxer, the matador, is trying to make the pressure fighter miss and make him pay. But in Mike Tyson fights, no, he'd be making you miss. He's coming forward at you, putting loads of pressure on you, which is triggering you to throw punches at him to try and keep him off. But when you throw punches at him, he's slipping those shots and then he's countering you. So he was a nightmare to fight in the early rounds. An absolute nightmare. Because he had great skills. I want to say Mike Tyson was one of the most, if not the most, skilled pressure fighter that I've ever seen. Can anybody think of a pressure fighter who was that skilled? Now, he was obviously one-dimensional in terms of he didn't have a back foot at all. And you wouldn't expect a 5'10" heavyweight to have a back foot, but yeah, he didn't have one. He only knew one way to fight, and that was coming forwards. But his skill set as a pressure fighter was phenomenal. You know, phenomenal skill set as a pressure fighter. Mark Hatch says Rocky Marciano. Rocky Marciano isn't in the same universe as Mike Tyson. Not in terms of skills, power, chin, anything. Not in the same universe. Yeah, Duran was a very skilled pressure fighter. And in fact, that was Mike Tyson's favorite fighter, was Roberto Duran. No, I don't think Canelo's as skilled as Mike Tyson as a pressure fighter. Canelo's more rounded than Mike Tyson because Canelo's got a back foot game. But specifically pressure fighting. Encircle says Fraser, for example, could put pressure for 45 minutes of a fight. Tyson can't do that. That's true, but that's relating to stamina. I'm talking about skills. Mike Tyson's pressure fighting skills were just on another level. No, way beyond Triple G. Manny Pacquiao, I don't really count Manny Pacquiao as a dedicated pressure fighter. And even when he was more aggressive, he was quite simple. He just come in throwing a big left hand. It was very fast and everything, but no, Mike Tyson had great pressure fighting skills. He could counter, he was a prolific counterpuncher on the front foot. If you go back and watch a lot of Mike Tyson's fights when he was in his prime, many of his knockouts came from counterpunches that he threw on the front foot. So again, he had this mechanism where he's rushing at you. That triggers you into throwing punches at him to keep him off. But what you actually do is give him the opportunity to slip your shots and then counter you. And he would do that constantly, especially in the early rounds of fights. He was so skilled at being able to move his head coming forward, draw your lead, counter you, and also lead himself. And he had every punch in the book. He had left hook, right hook, straight right, the jab, uppercuts with both hands, overarm shots. Every shot in the book was designed to destroy you. And tremendous hand speed. I mean, I've never seen a power puncher at heavyweight with that type of hand speed. Honorable mentions would be Shannon Briggs and Corey Sanders, and maybe Itauma, you know? We'll see how his career plays out. But up to this point, Mike Tyson, in terms of power punching, had the most ridiculous hand speed I've ever seen. Just ridiculous. When he would open up, it was crazy, bro. It was crazy. Yeah, Floyd Patterson had great hand speed. But by today's standards, Floyd Patterson wouldn't be a heavyweight. Floyd Patterson was like 190 pounds. Indeed, Patterson was, I think he in the Olympics, was he a middleweight or a light heavyweight in the Olympics? But he definitely boxed in the amateurs as a middleweight. I want to say, I think he turned pro at light heavyweight. Or did he turn pro at middleweight? But he was very, very small. They had to build him up. And he had a glass jaw too, that's right. And even though Patterson might have had quicker hands than Mike Tyson, he wasn't as defensively blessed as Mike Tyson. Even though Mike Tyson's a bigger fighter, Mike Tyson's defense was much better than Patterson's defense. Kayvon says, is Floyd Patterson still alive? I don't think so. I think he died many years ago. Yeah, Patterson could box on the back foot a bit. That's right, he could. He could box on the back foot a bit. But as a pressure fighter, Patterson wasn't as good as Mike Tyson. He wasn't as good at slipping and countering quickly as Mike Tyson was. Patterson was Patterson, even though he was a smaller fighter, he was actually more rigid than Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson was more fluid than Patterson. Shout out to Agni for the super chat. He says, Partridge being named after Tyson should have alluded to Partridge not taking boxing seriously by drinking and being grossly overrated. Well, you know, some people believe that when you take on somebody's name like that, you take on their curses. And if Mike Tyson was cursed with demons that led to his drinking and partying and all that type of business, did Partridge inherit it? Or is it just a case of John Fury being the type of character he is? Of course he would want to name his son Tyson as the middle name. Obviously Luke Tyson Partridge. Yeah? Because Mike Tyson was his favorite fighter. So it makes sense, you know, and like father, like son, they've both got not just a fiery character, but kind of a reckless character. Johnny Partridge used to drink a lot and womanize, and I mean, his son doesn't do so much of the womanizing, but yeah, the drinking and overeating and all that type of stuff. Johnny Partridge did that, and the apple didn't fall too far from the tree. Luke Partridge done the same. Galaxy Edit says Mike Tyson is the most overrated fighter in history. I would agree that he's definitely up there, and perhaps he's one of the most overrated fighters in history. I'd argue that Partridge actually became more overrated, given what Partridge hasn't achieved. You know, at least Mike Tyson achieved more than Partridge did. But yeah, Mike Tyson's up there as one of the most overrated. But I always have to clarify what I mean by overrated, because I don't mean it in the sense that many other people mean it. When they say overrated, they're literally saying somebody's rubbish. I'm not saying that somebody's necessarily rubbish when I call them overrated. And Mike Tyson certainly wasn't rubbish. He was a great fighter. Just not as good as many of his fanboys make him out to be. Because they literally say that if Costamato hadn't died and if Mike Tyson had stayed with Rooney, he would have gone 100-0, like John Fury on the hard road. They think Mike Tyson would have gone 100-0 if he'd stayed with Kevin Rooney. And they say it as though it's a fact. I mean, come on. So yeah, in that sense, I agree with you. Mike Tyson was grossly overrated. But as overrated as he was, because his fanboys just get ridiculously carried away, he was still a very formidable fighter. Very, very formidable fighter. Mazzy says, did Mike Tyson have an inside game? Of course he had an inside. Mike Tyson was a 5'10" heavyweight pressure fighter. So yeah, he had a hell of an inside game. And I think the only person that ever could have lived during his era, right, during the 80s and 90s, the only person that ever could have lived with a prime Tyson on the inside is Holyfield. I don't think anyone else could have lived with him on the inside. Riddick Bowe, no way. I don't think George Foreman would have lived with him on the inside. You know, the 80s, 90s version of Foreman. He ain't living with Mike Tyson, a prime Tyson on the inside. No way. Larry Holmes on the inside against prime? No. There was nobody, in my opinion, other than Holyfield that could actually live with Tyson on the inside in the 80s and 90s. Bob says Bowe slugged it out with Holyfield, though. Yeah, but Holyfield wasn't the puncher that Mike Tyson was. And Holyfield still dropped Riddick Bowe in the second fight, nearly had him out. Riddick Bowe didn't have the defense on the inside to be able to absorb Mike Tyson's power. Or repel Mike Tyson's power. No. I think Mike Tyson would have gone through Riddick Bowe in 5-6 rounds. Brutally stopped him, I think. Because Riddick Bowe just was defensively very poor. Took way too many shots. And that's why he can barely string a sentence together now. Yeah? Riddick Bowe is terribly punch drunk. And I just don't think he had the defense nor the chin for Tyson. Yeah, he was able to take Holyfield shots for the most part, other than that left hook in the third fight, Did I say second fight? Third fight, which dropped him. He was able to take Holyfield. He did get wobbled a few times, but he was able to take the shots for the most part. And just as a comparison, Lennox Lewis fought Holyfield twice, and Lewis took Holyfield's shots much better than Riddick Bowe did. I think Riddick Bowe got away with having not the greatest chin. I'm not saying he had a glass jaw, but I don't think he had the greatest chin in the world, Riddick Bowe. They kept him away from punches his whole career. The only punches that Riddick Bowe ever fought were Andrew Gallotta, who was a decent puncher, but not a murderous puncher. And he beat the crap out of Riddick Bowe in those two fights. Dropped him several times. So Gallotta was a decent puncher, and Jorge Luis Gonzalez was a decent puncher, but they weren't murderous punchers. And there were murderous punchers around during that era. You know, Lennox Lewis, Mike Tyson, Razor Ruddock. There were many, many real murderous punchers that are around in the 1990s. Riddick Bowe didn't fight any of them. You know what I mean? They kept him away from big punches. Shout out to Agni for the super chat. He says, how do you think Prime Holyfield does against Lewis? I think it's a much better fight. Holyfield wasn't washed up or anything when he fought Lewis. He was still a formidable, world-class fighter, but he wasn't quite at his best anymore. I think Holyfield's like 2 years older than Lennox Lewis, so there isn't a massive age gap between them. The thing is, Lennox Lewis reached his athletic prime in his late 20s, but he didn't reach his technical prime until his mid-30s. So it's kind of, you have to weigh that up as well. You have to think, well, if Lewis fought Holyfield right after he beat Razor Ruddock, that would have been a prime Holyfield versus prime Lewis, but obviously Holyfield lost to Riddick Bowe, so that fight didn't happen. And when Riddick Bowe became champion, rather than face Lewis, who was his mandatory, he threw the WBC belt in the trash. He vacated it. But had Holyfield won that fight, that was the prime version of Holyfield. I think he was 29 when he fought Riddick Bowe the first time. That version of Holyfield against Lewis, against a 27-year-old Lewis. I think he was 27 when he fought Razor Ruddock, 26, 27. Lewis was faster, a lot faster in his late 20s than he was in his mid-30s. Way faster. He was a lot lighter. I think against Ruddock he weighed in the 220s. Yeah, Lennox Lewis, big old Lennox Lewis, 6'5", 84-inch reach, was in the 220s against Razor Ruddock in his late 20s. And because he was that light, he moved around the ring so much faster. His punches were sharper. He didn't look as sloppy at that kind of weight. So him against that, it would have been intriguing. I would still say Lewis wins. Yeah, I'd still say Lewis wins though. Shout out to Muraz Man for the super chat. He says David Tua could have Ibeabuchi also. I guess you mean fought with Mike Tyson on the inside, but they were really early 2000s. Well, no, late 90s, very late 90s. Okay. Could those guys have hung with a prime Tyson on the inside? I don't think they could have done, you know. I don't think they could have done. I see what you're saying, but Mike Tyson was so dynamic on the inside. he would have this Orlando Canizales type footwork where he'd be in front of you and then he'd quickly shift to the side, get an angle and hit you with a hook or an uppercut in a split second. Ibeabuchi and Tua can't move like that. You know, Mike Tyson was so much more dynamic than either of those guys up close. If you're talking about the 90s version of Mike Tyson, yeah, they might have been able to hang on the inside with the 90s, mid to late 90s version of Tyson, who wasn't as dynamic, wasn't as energetic. But the mid to late 80s Tyson, personally, I don't think so. I think they would have come off second best on the inside. That's my personal opinion. We don't have a time machine to make those matchups happen. But shout out to Moroz Man for the super chat. Michael Merck says Evander did fine versus Tyson on the inside. Yeah, but Evander had a particular skill set on the inside which Ibeabuchi and David Tua didn't have. They didn't have that level of, I mean, we never saw Ibeabuchi get experienced enough, for one. And Tua never really had that skill set on the inside. Tua was pretty basic on the inside and even more so on the outside. He was pretty basic on the inside, Tua. You know, he wasn't really a sophisticated counter-puncher. I mean, he did throw counters here and there, but he wasn't that sophisticated on the inside. Holyfield, way, way more advanced than Tua up close. Way more advanced in terms of slipping and countering and setting traps and all that type of business, which is what gave Mike Tyson all the trouble. Tua's far more basic up close. Hits harder than Holyfield, yeah, but far more basic in terms of what he's doing. I think Mike Tyson would have been 2-3 steps ahead of David Tua on the inside, personally. I don't think that would have ended well for David Tua, you know, that's just my opinion. Bigger Ank says, what age would you say prime Mike Tyson actually was? It was between the ages of maybe 21 to 23. Or maybe even 21 to, maybe 20 to 22 is probably better. Yeah, so from when he beat Berbick to the time he beat Michael Spinks, I think maybe he was 22 years old when he fought Spinks. Or was he 23? 22 or 23 when he fought Spinks. But when he got beat by Buster Douglas, he was 24. Yeah, that's how young he was. Crazy. So it was a 4-year reign, basically, from 86 to 1990. That was his first reign. But in that first reign, he had 11 world title fights in 4 years. That's how active he was. Can you imagine? You never see world champions doing that these days. Mike Tyson had 11 world title fights in 4 years in his first reign. So he was very, very active. Shout out to Trolls Are Bad. I know it's crazy, Galaxy Edits. We're only getting the first press conference for this fight and it's just fight week now. Very weird. Kayvon Green says, didn't Ike fight recently? No, I think he's supposedly got a fight coming up, but it's no longer going to be against Danny Williams. It's going to be against some obscure, I think it's a Nigerian opponent. Let me have a look here. Ike Ibeabuchi, yeah, he's still scheduled to fight on the 23rd of this month against Idris Afeni in Lagos. And Afeni is the same age as, oh no, he's not the same age as Ibeabuchi. Ibeabuchi is 52, Afeni is 40. He's got a record of 18-8 with 2 draws. Imagine if he knocks Ibeabuchi out. That'll be a disaster. Alan Grill says, damn, how does a fighter lose his prime from so young, 23? Well, there are several factors. Mike Tyson had a very high energy style. Very, very high energy. Because he would throw punches with full power. Basically, every time he punched, it was full power. And he was constantly moving his head. And he was rushing in with very quick foot movements and what have you. That style requires a lot of energy. Defensively and offensively, a lot of energy is required to fight that way. And a lot of maniacal training. It's a young man's style, basically. So that's one of the factors for why his prime was so short. Because at his peak, he still had that youthful energy. You know, the energy you have when you're a teenager where you can just like train forever and run forever. He had that because he was training, obviously, from a teenager. He was being trained by Costamato. He was like a professional boxing coach. And Teddy Atlas, you know, I know did most of the heavy lifting, but still, he had like a professional boxing setup from when he was an amateur. And these guys were training him like some kind of fighting dog. So he had that youthful energy, the energy you have as a youth, as a teenager. He carried it through into his very early 20s. And he was setting that energy on his opponents, right? And it allowed him to have that frenetic style of constantly moving the head, moving the feet, throwing loads of shots, very explosive, throwing everything with full power. By the time you're in your mid-20s, you're not going to be able to keep fighting like that. You're going to start slowing down, yeah? On top of that, Mike Tyson wasn't a clean liver. Especially once he started hanging around with Don King and, you know, he was getting far less disciplined, hanging out in clubs, drinking a lot, staying up late. So that combined with having a young man's style and also combined with having a style that wasn't very versatile. He only knew one way to fight. Eventually somebody was going to figure out the style. And once they figured the style out, it was pretty much all downhill. So there's a number of factors for why his prime was so short. Lifestyle, the style being suitable for young fighters, and the style being kind of limited. Yeah, indeed encircled. Larry Holmes, in the run-up to his fight with Mike Tyson, predicted that Mike Tyson would implode. And indeed he did. And that's when Mike Tyson was still with Kevin Rooney. That's why I've never bought the narrative that if he'd stayed with Rooney, he would have gone 100-0. No, Mike Tyson was going to go off the rails no matter whether Rooney was there or not. You know? He was always going to go off the rails. That's just who he is. Larry Holmes could see it. All right, peeps, I'm going to shut this stream down. Hope you guys have all enjoyed it. Shout out to each and every one of you for joining the conversation, and a special shout out to those who donated via Super Chat. They were Muros Man, Agni, Kayvon Green, D-Man, Bobs, Ocean Blue, Matthew Wilson, Suited and Booted, Danny, Orca, Matt Borgerson, Mr. Luca, Jack Trussler. Yeah, I think I've read everybody's name. So yeah, much appreciated for the conversation. Until next time, take care, be good. I'll catch you on the other side. I'm out.